Norman?
Yes.
We're recording now, and I'm leaving, and you guys are ready to go.
We close those. Thanks.
Are you leaving the room?
Just me.
Who is the person who's presiding?
Hold on 1 second, Norman. I'll let you take over. I'm gonna close this. You guys are.
Yeah, oh shit. Don't break stuff. Stop breaking stuff, dude. This was tragic.
Hi, where are you?
Yeah, that's good.
Turn your phone Okay. Well, Norman is here with us.
So how do we look, Norman?
Well, you look fine. I should tell you that in 1988, late 87, 88, I went to live in the occupied territories. I went to live in the West Bank. And before we went, we were given some cultural lessons to make sure that we don't offend any people there inadvertently. And one of the things we were told is, don't stick your feet in the air so that your soles are facing them, because that's considered a very big insult in Arab culture. And when I was there, I mentioned this to the family where I was living, and they were kind of surprised, and they said it's not insulting to stick your feet in somebody's face in the West. So when I tuned in this video and I saw the two people in the back with their legs on the table, I thought to myself, well, maybe we need some cultural lessons in Arizona. How you talk to a professor. It's okay. If you're laid back in Arizona, one in Rome lives the Romans. What university are you at? This is Tucson?
No, this is Prescott College in Prescott, Arizona.
Oh, Prescott. I've never been there. I worked in the 1970s. I did voter registration at Window Rock Native American Reservation in Arizona. It's near Flagstaff, I remember.
Yeah.
Is that anywhere near where you guys are?
It's about maybe 200 miles, 250 miles.
That's a distance. And then occasionally I pass through Arizona, usually in the summer, because I used to hitchhike across country. And the only thing I remember about Arizona was those summers are definitely something you want to forget.
Not here.
Not here?
No, we're in.
How hot does it get in the store?
Yes, Sam.
How hot does it get?
Oh, maybe 90 degrees sometimes.
Oh, 90 is not bad. No, I was thinking higher than 90 degrees. And how is the humidity?
Very low.
Really? Oh, so you guys.
We have a little monsoon in August, where it rains every other day, but it doesn't build up humidity though.
Well, then you're pretty lucky, because other parts do get over 100, right? In August.
I was raised in Phoenix, and Phoenix would get 120. I'd go out on my bicycle and ride around.
Yeah, it was brutal.
Hey Norman, where are you talking to us from?
Okay, I'm talking to you from Brooklyn, New York. New York, as you know, is a pretty big place. So for me to get to mid-Manhattan from where I live on public transportation, it is a good hour and 20 minutes. I live down by Coney Island Beach. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually I'm a very un-New Yorker. There are no skyscrapers here. The air is very clean. And I spend a lot of time jogging along the seashore in the summer. So it's cool. It's a nice place. And I'm not a big fan of Manhattan. I find it very claustrophobic, suffocating. The air is filthy. There's no sun. And it's like being in the subway at rush hour. That's what Manhattan is like. I'm not a big fan of it. And also, Manhattan now is very, very, very expensive. It's another country. They have a standard of living there which is totally alien to me. Uh, it's just for rich people. It wasn't always that way. There were parts of Manhattan which were wealthy and parts which were not. But now it's just all rich people. Very, very expensive and way past anything. You want to go, they talk about Manhattan, the cultural life, a Broadway show. The cheapest seat for a Broadway show, the cheapest is $100. I don't have that kind of money.
You're behind a column.
Well, it's nice meeting you guys. And I was asked to prepare a small presentation. Israel Palestine has been with my professional and political focus my entire adult life. So I can easily speak several hours on the topic without glancing at a piece of paper. And I don't think it's particularly, I don't find it particularly, it doesn't work very well over video. It works good if you're in a classroom with people, but the video is a little bit remote. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set out a basic framework and then ask you or allow you to ask questions. And I'll give you as elaborate an answer as you want. If I go on too long, you just tell me and we move on. As it happens, we're right now living in a real anniversary year. And so many things are going to happen just this year, commemorations. It's kind of odd, I have to say. So if you have a little notebook in front of you, the basic anniversaries are number one, for those of you who have any background in the topic, it's 100 years this year after the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was issued in November 1917, and it was the declaration in which the British government basically came out in support of what they call creating a national home for the Jews in Palestine. The language was very carefully crafted, and it was the result of various conflicts among the parties to the declaration. They didn't say state, they used a more vaguer term, a home for the Jews. And they didn't say to make Palestine a home for the Jews. They said to create a Jewish home in Palestine. They were very careful about the use of the preposition in Palestine. Can anybody figure out why they worded it that way and they didn't say to create, to make Palestine into a Jewish home?
To allow for both cultures to coexist?
Yeah, very good. Who said that? Raise your hand so I could just, yes. They wanted to say you can get a part of Palestine, but you can't get the whole thing because there's already other people living there. So we'll entertain the idea of a Jewish home in Palestine, but you're not going to make Palestine a Jewish home because there's home to somebody else already. And basically, the Balfour Declaration started the process which climaxed roughly 30 years later in May 1948 in the creation of the State of Israel. So that's the first milestone for which we're now commemorating the century. As some of you might notice, the Balfour Declaration comes just at the time also of the 100th anniversary of the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution also occurs in November 1917, and that's not an accident. Some people argue they believed that Jews were very powerful in Russia and around the world. And they thought that Jews were powerful, can have influence on the Russian government. So they thought if we issue a Balfour Declaration, it'll keep the Russian government in the war on the side of the US and the UK, because at the time there were two Russian revolutions, one in February and one in October, November, depending on the calendar. But for our purposes, we'll call it November. And there was the feeling that there was a fear that Russia would drop out of the war after that first revolution in February 1917, because the Russians were sick of war and wanted their government to drop out. You will be surprised, but even the Russians lost 30 million people in World War II, but they also lost 7 million people in World War I. In both wars, the big loser, the people who were the main victims were the Russians. And so one of the reasons it was thought, let's issue a Balfour Declaration because the Jews are powerful and maybe they'll keep the Russian government in the war, meaning World War I. So there are all these coincidences, all of which climax and culminate 100 years ago this month. So we have first the Balfour Declaration, and then the next commemoration is in, just slipped my mind, in 1947, which is going to be 47, it's going to be how many decades ago? 6 decades ago? 47 is the partition resolution that comes after World War II, when the United Nations decides, after significant deliberations and after the Nazi Holocaust, the United Nations decides in 1947 to create 2 states in Palestine, a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Arab state, for various reasons, never came into being, but the Jewish state did. And so we'll now be commemorating the 70th. It's the 70th anniversary of the partition resolution, correct? Yes, 70th anniversary of the partition resolution. And then, so that's the second milestone. And these are all considered the most significant dates in the history of the conflict, and they all come the same time. They all at intervals of 10 or 20 years, always with a 7 at the end. So we have November 1917, then we have the partition resolution in 1947, and then in 1967, in the course of the June 1967 war, Israel occupies the only parts of Palestine that they didn't occupy in 1948 after the partition resolution, namely what has come to be called the West Bank and Gaza. So we're now celebrating, if you want to use the word celebrating, I guess the word is marking. We're now marking the 50th anniversary of Israel's occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. So far, we have the centenary of the Balfour Declaration, 7 decades after the partition resolution, 5 decades after the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. But we're still very far from done, because this year we will also mark the 30 years after the First Intifada, when the Palestinians entered into a civil revolt. The Palestinians in the occupied territories, the West Bank and Gaza, they entered into a civil revolt against the Israeli occupation. Hold on for one moment. Just give me a half second. Hello? I'm doing a Skype interview, so can we just talk in like an hour? Is that fine? Thank you so much. Okay, And as it happens, as the history gets closer, I become a real life participant because I went to live in the occupied territories during the First Intifada. I was kind of a rarity because it was a genuine popular revolt. It wasn't the Tea Party. It was serious business. I was American. I was Jewish. So I was a double novelty because at that time, things have changed a lot. But at that time, for a person of Jewish background to go and support the Palestinians in a revolt against the Israeli occupation, it was odd. It was a novelty. And I was there off and on every year for the next 6 years or more. I would go back every year until 10 years ago I was banned, but until Israel banned me, I would go back. The first time was the First Intifada, so that was 30 years ago. And then we have another, we have two. One is of much lesser significance than the other, but 10 years ago in 2007, Israel imposed its blockade on Gaza. And it's been a pretty brutal, inhuman, immoral, illegal blockade. Basically, it's been the people, well, it's not me, I'll just quote to you David Cameron, the conservative former British Prime Minister, and he described Gaza as the world's largest open-air prison. And that's basically what it is. You can't go in, you can't go out. Nothing can go in, nothing can come out. The only thing that actually goes in is periodically Israel launches what it calls operations, and which aren't even wars, they're just massacres. They periodically launch massacres against Gaza. And the massacres in and of themselves are quite ghastly. But then there's the added dimension, namely because of the blockade, they can't rebuild after a massacre. So in Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9, 6,300 homes were destroyed. Operation Protective Edge in 2014, 18,000 homes were destroyed. When I say destroyed, I mean flattened, they're pulverized. And you can't rebuild because Israel doesn't let in construction material. And so you have this, it's a prison which is periodically demolished. And what makes it all the worse, if that's not bad enough, and that's pretty bad to begin with, but makes it all the worse is if you look at yourselves, I would guess your average age is about 20, 21 years old. Over half of the people in Gaza, over half are younger than you. Over half of the people in Gaza are children. They're 18 years old or younger. 70% of the people in Gaza are refugees, namely they were kicked out of Israel in 1948, or children and grandchildren of refugees. So you have this inhuman siege such that no one goes in, no one goes out, nothing goes in, nothing goes out. An inhuman siege which periodically Israel visits what it calls an operation, but which is in effect a massacre. And then because of the siege, nothing can be rebuilt. And on top of all that, the people on the receiving end of these massacres and the human catastrophe, because of the lack of building materials, the people on the receiving end, they're kids. I mean, we have to be clear about that. You're talking about a population which is half or a little over half consists of children. And 70% consists of refugees and descendants of refugees. At this point, just to take one statistic that always stands out for me, Everybody agrees. There's no dispute. 95% of the drinking water in Gaza is unfit for human consumption because the water aquifers have been poisoned, contaminated, and because the waste disposal system gets periodically destroyed by Israel's assaults. Basically, the bottom line is each day a parent has to watch as his or her child is being poisoned drinking water. Now, that's just a fact. You can just Google wherever you want, Gaza water, and you'll see everybody agrees 95% of the water is unfit for human consumption. But that's not a natural situation. If they had a good waste disposal system, if they had electricity, their kids wouldn't be poisoned each day as they consume water. And so you have this month, this year, the 10th anniversary of that brutal siege on Gaza and its child population. And then since we were introducing personal notes, and I quite acknowledge I'm not suffering from visions of grandeur, I recognize the triviality of what I'm about to say, but I'll say it nonetheless. This marks the 10th year that I was denied tenure at my university and have been unemployed. I was never able to work again. I was stopped dead in my tracks in the prime of my professional life, and I was never able to find work. And if we trace back things far enough, I guess I have to blame Arthur Balfour, the author of the Balfour Declaration, because if he hadn't started the train, if the train hadn't left the station, then I wouldn't have gotten involved in the conflict, and I would probably still be employed. So I have a personal stake, though, as I say, I'm fully aware next to what I've just described. It's quite trivial in significance. So that's basically the picture. 100 years, 70 years, 50 years, 30 years, 10 years. There are a lot of milestones. I feel different. I have trouble saying anniversaries or celebrations because these are quite awful events, as it turned out, for the indigenous population. And with that, I'll let you ask whatever is on your mind, or whatever you've been studying, any curiosities. And I particularly like it when people challenge me. So you could say, what do you mean massacres? What about those Hamas rockets? Aren't they building tunnels, attacking Israel? You know, and our Hamas people, fundamentalists, Nazis, whatever, you know, feel free to ask me. And just my rule of thumb is if you're respectful, I'm respectful. Ask whatever you like, just be respectful and we'll be fine. Go ahead.
Why don't you say your name as well when you ask your question?
You can use an alias if you like.
My name's Wilson. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
My name's Wilson. You said when you were living in Palestinian territory that you were at one point not allowed to live there?
I went back and forth beginning in 1988. I guess it was August 1988. And I went back and forth almost, but not every year, until 2004. And then I took a break a little, I think 2 years. And the next time when I went back, they told me I couldn't return for 10 years. I was not an unusual, I was a little higher profile because I was better known, but they banned a lot of people, large numbers of Jews also, from going over. And now they've recently passed a bill according to which if you support any boycott of Israel because of its occupation or because of the illegal settlements, you're also forbidden to go there. So there's a fairly large number of people who they're now preventing from going there. So I'm just one. I want to be factually correct. I was a little bit unique back then, but now it's quite a large number of people who are prohibited from going. So I haven't been there since 2004, and my friends tell me it's changed quite a lot. I couldn't tell you. I was in Gaza in 2009 after the first major Israeli attack, Operation Cast Lead. I visited Gaza because there you can get in. At the time, you were able to get in through Egypt. Since then, the border has been closed, but at that time, you could get in. Yes.
So my name is Connor, and a question that has kind of come up in our class a couple times, I think, is how is Israel able to defeat other Arab countries when they were first declared a nation in their War of Independence?
Well, it wouldn't be the first time in the history of humanity that a relatively small country, which is well organized, manages to control large chunks of territory completely incommensurate, unequal to the size of the country it is. So you take the case, if you ever look at a map of the world, it's not all that easy to find England on a map of the world. It's not exactly the biggest place on the map. Now, sometimes, you have to struggle a little to find it. I mentioned that because England, at its height of its empire, it controlled 1/4 of the world's land surface and 1/4 of the world's population. Now, you can ask the same question. How could this relatively small country? Now, keep in mind, it's really astonishing. I mean, even at this point in my life, I can't figure it out. There was no communications. There wasn't telephone. There wasn't internet. And sometimes, I'm in India. I go to India. I go on this high mountain in India. And I'm thinking to myself, how the hell could England be controlling this mountain? It's thousands of miles away. There's no communication. It takes about 6 years to say hello and goodbye. I'm serious. By the time you say happy birthday to your child's already in college. It's a far, far away. How did they manage to pull that off? But they did. Take another example. I'm perfectly respectful of everyone in this room. I bet you half of you could not find Japan on the map. You couldn't find Japan on that very tiny place on the map. Very tiny place on the map. How did Japan manage to control all of Asia? It didn't only control it. It was pretty brutal. The Japanese killed about, the estimate is 26 million Chinese during World War II. When you hear the Chinese get very angry when Japan tries to underplay its crimes during World War II, it's because they still have very vivid memories of that. 26 million people were killed. How can this place that you can't even see in the map manage? Now, Israel happens to be, just to return to your question, it's a compact country which is very well organized, very high tech, a lot of national fervor. A lot of it, I think, is manufactured, but there's a lot of national fervor, self-righteousness, racism, all the rest. It's a lethal brew. And they managed to defeat, basically, the truth of the matter is, rickety and corrupt dictatorships. Yes.
So how were they able to organize and create that structure in such a short time period, though? Because Or like, was it already established? Or?
No, I think that's a fair question. It's just very hard to imagine how you managed to pull something like that off. They had a very dedicated leadership. Facts are facts. They were ruthless, but they were honest. The original leadership. Now the current governments are as corrupt as any government in the West. But at the beginning, they were ruthless, but they were incorruptible. They were relatively incorruptible, relatively austere, simple. They won a state. And they were willing to live at the beginning in pretty harsh, simple conditions in order to establish it. Now, you folks here should not find that so unusual, because how did we conquer the West? It was the same sort of mentality. As we call them, the frontiersmen, they defeated quite a lot of people. This wasn't an empty place or a wilderness either. And they managed to pull it off. There was good organization, and a lot of the frontier was conquered. It wasn't conquered with the support of the federal government in the West, in the East Coast. It was not. These were frontiersmen who went out on their own, and they were very aggressive, very murderous, very brutal, very committed. And they managed to wipe out quite a lot of people. So it's not all that surprising, though I can understand your point. Here are Jews coming over from Eastern Europe to basically a completely alien space. And how did they manage to do it? And it is, I'll grant it was a pretty impressive thing, the conquest. A lot of them, just to get the picture fully correct, remember it comes after World War II, and the Jewish community in Palestine was not aligned with Great Britain. And a lot of them got military training in the course of World War II. So they knew, so to speak, the art of war. So there was the military training, there was the ideological commitment. After the Nazi Holocaust, their view was, come what may, we're getting a state now. And they were not going to accept no for an answer. So there was an element of ideological zeal combined with ruthlessness, as in come what may, we're getting a state. So there was the zeal and the ruthlessness, and they were up against governments which were basically puppets of the British, had no popular support. They were just really, just as they are now, basically, really creepy, corrupt, wretched, incompetent leaders. Nothing there has really changed much. There was a period of hope during the 1950s with the rise of what was called Nasserism, named after the Egyptian president, Gamal Abdel Nasser. There was a hope that Egypt and the Arab world would enter into the modern world. It didn't happen. And now you have, right now, just a complete disaster across the Arab world, and all the rot now is decomposing. And that's what we see before our eyes. The only exceptions being Iran, which manages to hold together a pretty sophisticated operation. But the rest, we have to be honest about these things. I'm really tough on the way Israel carries on, and I have paid a personal price for being tough about it. But you have to be honest about these things. Israel has made real contributions to the modern world. It has, in the fields of technology and in other fields. Now ask yourself a simple question. Name me one thing that Saudi Arabia has done, has contributed since it was created. It's one of the richest. No, it didn't create that. And it doesn't even dig it up. It just has foreign workers. It brings in slaves. It doesn't do anything. Nothing. Nothing. Here's a country that's been around for about 100 years. Nothing. Wealth that you can't imagine. You can't conceive that kind of wealth. They make Trump look like a pauper. Nothing. Our world is a wasteland. I don't blame them in the sense that the regimes have been propped up by the West, but we have to be honest about these things. Israel has been pretty, in many respects, not all, and it's been overblown, but it's been an impressive achievement at many levels, and that's a fact. And the two can go hand in hand, you know. The US can be an impressive place in many respects, but also it goes hand in hand with some pretty horrible things that this country does and that this country is responsible for. The two can be true. But when you ask how can it be done, how did it happen, it has two sides. One side is the certain elements of impressiveness in the first, the pre-Israel community, and now Israel. There are certain elements of impressiveness, but then there's the other side, the complete wretchedness and corruption of their adversary. It's just not very difficult to beat these people, whether it's in the battle of the books or a battle on the field. They're just nothing. There's nothing there. It's just rot. Go ahead. You took off your baseball cap.
I did, yeah. I thought
Was that out of cultural respect?
Indeed. So my question for you is, do you think that both states could exist peacefully without any conflict in the distant future?
No, not really. I think it'll be tough. Israel will be lording it over the Palestinians. If their state were to come into being, it would be surrounded on one side by Jordan, a second side by Israel, a third side by Egypt. They're all working together to reduce the Palestinians to rubble. They'll become basically a slave state. I recognize all of that. It's not going to be easy. But then you have to ask, what are the alternatives? Is there any realistic alternative in the near or even middle term future? And the answer is no. And the fact of the matter is that historical change, unfortunately, it's not like black becomes white, dusk becomes dawn. It just doesn't work that way. There are now more African Americans involved in the judicial system, in our judicial system, than there were slaves before the Civil War. So you can ask yourself, what kind of progress have we made in 100 years, or African Americans? If you look at South Africa, the average black worker was better off under apartheid economically than he is today. If you want to look at progress as just this steady curve up, it doesn't work that way. You make some gains and you make some not gains, you know? One out of every 4 African Americans is caught up in the judicial system, most of the time for crazy things, you know? For doing what all you folks do in your dorms, namely take drugs. But they don't raid dorms. They raid ghettos. Well, it's a fact. I think about 60% of college students are using some form of drugs. And I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, what does he know? It's 99%, but I'll use the conservative 60%. Nobody raids your dorms because you're white. So I think progress is always uneven. Under the circumstances, I can't see anything better than at least to end the occupation, which just wrecks people's lives from the moment you get up to the moment you go to sleep. I'll just go around the room. Go ahead.
Yeah, my alias is Cole. Or about the occupation, the settlements. You painted a pretty gross picture of the settlements, or the Gaza Strip rather. If international opinion, and by that I mean the UN General Assembly, Human Rights Watch, organizations like that, that have a lot of clout. If everybody believes that the occupation is exactly that, an occupation, what are the biggest factors in the Palestinians, keeping the Palestinians from moving back into their land?
Mm-hmm. Well, the main factor is very simple. The main factor is law in itself doesn't impose its will unless there's a force to impose the law on you. Take the case of the United States. The order desegregating schools, it passes in 1954. You all know Brown versus the Board of Education, and it declares segregation illegal, separate but equal has to be abolished. By 1960, you know how many schools were desegregated? 3%. You have to have a force behind the law. And it required a civil rights movement and creating enough of a ruckus, and what's very important, creating enough of embarrassment for the national government, the federal government, to do something. And once you create enough of a ruckus and you create enough of an embarrassment, you force the desegregation of the schools. Now, there are a lot of UN resolutions which say Israel has to stop building settlements. The settlements are illegal. There are a lot of human rights organizations that have said, including one you mentioned, Human Rights Watch, that the blockade of Gaza is illegal. But then you have to get people to do something about it. And the major actor blocking anything is the United States. The worst, by the way, of all the modern presidents, by far, the worst was Obama. Now, probably Trump will end up even worse. It's too early to say. But Obama was the worst. Obama's the biggest fraud on God's earth. All these pretenses to being so progressive and enlightened. He was horrible. He was the first president until the last month in office who blocked every Security Council resolution critical of Israel. Every other president at least allowed for a resolution or two, sometimes quite more than two, to go through the Security Council. He blocked everything, couldn't criticize Israel. Now you have to bear in mind, that was the period in which Gaza experienced the worst horrors. So you had the worst horrors and at the same time, the worst president of the US. And he allowed everything to happen. Obama's elected November 4th, 2008. Operation Cast Lead begins on August 26, 2008. It runs through January 17th. Obama doesn't say anything. He's the elected president. He doesn't say anything. Do you know why it ends on January 17th? I mean, it's almost laughable. Do you know why it ends January 17th? Because he tells the Israelis to stop the war because he doesn't want any distractions from his inauguration. That's the only reason. Because he's a stupefying narcissist and all he wants, all he worries about is that all the cameras are on him. Same thing with Operation Protective Edge. Operation Protective Edge in July, August 2014, it was horrible. Israel left behind 2.5 million tons of rubble. 550 babies were killed. 18,000 homes were destroyed. Obama didn't say anything. Oh, he did say, I take that back. He did say, every day he kept saying Israel has the right to protect itself. Oh, really? That's how you protect yourself? By bulldozing homes of refugees and children? That's how you protect yourself? The homes weren't killed by collateral damage. Israel has a very sophisticated army. It went in with guided missiles and blew up the homes. And then when it took over territory, it would rope off entire neighborhoods, bring in what are called the D9 bulldozers, and just flatten the area. Now, if that's not horrible enough, you're flattening the homes of kids. That's what you're doing. You're flattening the homes of kids. I'll be honest with you, I cannot even conceive that kind of heartlessness. I really can. You kids, you guys here, you're about 20 years old, 21, and each time your computer crashes, you go into a hysteric. Oh my God, my computer crashed. I just lost 3 hours of work. I'm going to commit suicide. I wish I die. I hope the whole world blows up. Because your computer crashed and you lost 3 hours of work. Now, what do you think it's like to lose your house? To have your whole home bulldozed before your eyes? By really sadists, vandals, a Genghis Khan-like army. No, it's unacceptable. And I'm not going to use pretty or poetic language to justify it or try to make it sound better than it is. To keep doing that, to keep destroying, they're refugees. They lost their homeland, and now all they have left is their home. And after depriving them of their homeland, you pulverize their home? No. Sorry, you're not going to get a pass from me. You get a pass from Obama. He says they're protecting, Israel has the right to protect itself. Biggest fake on God's earth. It's one of the saddest things to see that man, how he manipulates people. You remember how everybody attacked Hillary Clinton for taking the $250,000 from Goldman Sachs for her speeches? Anyone remember that? You remember? So last week, Obama, he gave 2 speeches last week. Each one he took $400,000. $400,000 from the pharmaceutical companies. $400,000, and nobody wants to say anything. Nobody wants to say anything. They're so afraid. Why? It's okay. It's not good when Hillary does it, but it's okay when he does it. The same crook. No, it's a problem. It's a problem. People have lost all courage to speak the truth because of the stupid political correctness, which is as big a curse as right-wing nonsense. Okay, now everybody's looking down because everyone here is politically correct and they don't like what I have to say, and too bad, I'm going to say it anyway. Who's the next person here? Who's looking down? Who's writing? No, she's writing busily.
He's going in a circle.
Yes, her. Ask a question.
She can't hear you that well because she can speak for yourself too if you want to speak for yourself. I don't understand. I'm sorry, but I don't even.
I'll let he's going in a circle, so he's touching everyone.
Do you have
for their question? You have a question.
In my classes, everybody has to participate. You don't have a choice.
She can't, but the thing is, her way her hearing works, it doesn't work really well when she can't read your lips or have some.
Oh, okay, that's fair enough. My fault, but that's fine. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. Next.
Which way are we going here?
We're just going to go around. Is there a person I can't see anyone further up than the fellow with the white shirt that's opened up at the collar. So if there's somebody before you, I can't see that person.
That's Savannah.
Yeah, I can't see that.
2 people over here.
Maybe you could just shift the camera or the
We'll
just shift it a little. Oh, good. That's the other option. Thank you.
Oh, that's black.
moving around the room. We should all just like shift our chairs. That like a rotary board. Someone asked him
Can you see me?
if he has differences.
Yes, I see you now, and you're allowed to attack me for everything I just said. I have no problem with that. I said, so long as people are respectful, you don't have to agree. You have every right to express your strong disagreement.
I agree with most of the things you said. So, let's see. I just want to know, like, realistically, what you think is going to happen with Palestine in, like, the next 100 years.
Realistically, I believe in the old adage, even though I'm an atheist, God helps those who help themselves. The Palestinians have been battered. As you've already seen from our brief talk, it's been going on for 100 years. And 100 years, they've not really, except for the first Intifada, they've not really registered much in the way of victories. It's one loss after another loss after another loss. And then a lot of hopelessness sets in. A lot of despair sets in. A lot of despondency sets in. And a lot of people become cynical about politics because they see a handful of people get rich and they see themselves getting worse. And so they have this attitude of every man for himself. They give up on politics and just try to figure out, maybe I can find a little niche and make out wealth for myself, even if everything around me goes to pot. And so people there have basically given up now. The public opinion polls show that in Gaza, about 70% of the young people, if they can get out, would get out now. They'll go anywhere. And I don't think it's very much different in the West Bank. And once people have given up on fighting, I can't be hopeful. You know, you can't, there's not going to be change coming from above, but because people in power, they only respect power. And if you are powerless in terms of your material resources, powerless in terms of your military resources, then the only power you have is in your numbers, in your people. And the people have given up. So I can't really be optimistic now. I have to be honest. You know, things can change overnight. I recognize that. And a lot of things which nobody would have ever believed in my lifetime came to pass. Overnight, the Soviet Union disappeared. Who would have imagined that? Overnight, apartheid disappeared. Who would have imagined that? Who would have imagined what movie I was watching? Anyone here watched the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Okay, it was a famous movie in 1968. And it's about an African-American from Harvard Medical School who's going to marry a white woman. And so it's 1968, and the father of the white woman, he's played by Spencer Tracy, and he's skeptical about this marriage because he says it's not going to work in our society. And then the couple, they make a joke, and it was meant to be just a joke. They said, well, we're going to raise our kid to grow up to be president. And everyone laughed. It was meant as a joke. Well, who would have guessed? In fact, it came to pass just when that kid would probably have been born around that time. So the moral is you can't predict tomorrow, and I recognize that. Things come to pass which seem like dreams. But if I have to make a rational calculation on the basis of what I see before my eyes and what I understand, I'd have to say, based on my rational calculation, there's at this particular moment in time no rational grounds for hope, because the people, for reasons which are perfectly understandable, have given up. They've been battered into submission. You?
Hi, I'm Michael.
Hi, Michael. I like that Hawaiian shirt.
Thank you. It's a really nice day here today. I saw that you, in one of your lectures, said that if all the Palestinians mobilized with pickaxes and the ICJ, which I guess says the wall is illegal, and marched on the wall, that they would achieve more than suicide bombings. And this goes along with what you wrote about Gandhi and finding the courage, and that they're killing themselves anyways, that this would be much more likely to achieve the intended result.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what I believe.
Do you think there's any likelihood that that's possible?
No, because the current leadership of the Palestinians, they're paid for to do what the Americans and the Israelis want them to do. And that leadership will not organize any kind of popular opposition, because the first thing a popular opposition would do is get rid of them. So they want to keep the population passive, hopeless, and so forth, because they're fully aware they're so corrupt that the first thing the Palestinians would do if they did get mobilized was to get rid of these crooks.
So if you were a Palestinian today, would you say that's the first course of action?
Yeah, the first course of action, in my opinion, I don't think the situation in Palestinian territories is much different than our own civil rights movement. Our own civil rights movement, first of all, it was based on the law. If you read the real histories of the civil rights movement, one of the most amazing characters, nobody knows him because all the real heroes of the civil rights movement are not known. Okay, I'll make the exception. The one exception I will make is Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King evolved into an extremely impressive leader. No question about it. My hat's off to him. There went, as the expression has it, there went a man. He was probably, in many ways, there are things about him which are probably extraordinary in world history. So if you ever have a boring evening and you have nothing to do, sit down, put this down on your piece of paper on your notes or in your, just Google Martin Luther King Memphis speech. Martin Luther King Memphis, MEMPHIS speech. It's one of the most amazing things. I have a friend who's probably the shrewdest analyst of world politics I've ever met. He's right up there with Noam Chomsky, for those of you who know Chomsky. He's got a very shrewd political mind. And he said to me once, it was probably the greatest speech ever given in human history, because King delivers the speech the night before he's killed. And in the speech, he basically gives his funeral oration. It's a very eerie thing to watch. A human being delivering his funeral oration, because he understood he was going to get killed. And probably he knew he was going to get killed the next day. It's an extraordinary event. But so King is, I look around, King is known, and King was an exceptional figure. But in general, the great leaders of the human rights movement, of the civil rights movement, they were all your age. That's a fact. It's very strange, but if you look at yourself, it was people who in their early 20s, they belonged to an organization called SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And they were the ones who desegregated the South. They didn't do it with fancy berets like the Black Panthers or with guns. They did it with real human courage. A human courage which nobody in the room there and nobody in the room here can possibly imagine. These were people who walked into the deep South, the little towns where the mayor, the police chief, the judges in the court, they all belong to the Ku Klux Klan. That's not a joke. That's a fact. They all belong to the Ku Klux Klan. And these people, your age, 18 to 22, they went into these rural areas, knocked on the doors to try to get people to register to vote. It was amazing. Amazing. If you ever want to watch a documentary, watch Freedom on My Mind. And Freedom on My Mind. And but when you read their story, they were very dependent on the law because there were a lot of laws on the books which protected them. The problem was when you are operating on your own, nobody's going to protect you. You need to force the federal government to protect you. And so they tried to manipulate, in a positive way, using that word, the federal government, in this case, Lyndon Baines Johnson, the Johnson administration, to force them to enforce the law. Now, there was not a snowball's chance in hell that you're going to convince anyone in the South, any white person in the South, to support voter registration. Maybe 5 people here, 6 people there, but that's it. It was a very entrenched system of white supremacy, of apartheid. It was an apartheid regime in our American South when I was growing up. So they had to get that federal government to impose its will on the South and to impose the law. And it's the same challenge for the Palestinians. They have to get the international community to impose the law, because occupations are governed by international law, to impose the law on the Israelis. And in my opinion, the only way you can get them to do it is the way our civil rights movement did. They engaged in a lot of very courageous, very heroic civil resistance, nonviolent, which embarrassed the federal government. Remember, at this time, we were engaged in the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and we were saying we were a democracy. But then you see in this democracy, these kids being beaten to death just for wanting to sit at a lunch counter. So the federal government was very embarrassed because the Russians were making, a bonanza in propaganda from the way our country was treating people who wanted just to vote. And so you had to embarrass them. It was a lot of sacrifice. Hey, I could never do that. I like to believe if I lived then, I would find it in me to overcome my fear and have gone down and did what they did. But speaking now, here, right now, no, I couldn't do that. I would be scared to death to do what those kids did. It takes a lot of courage. A lot of people lost their lives, but it worked. It worked. Palestinians have the right to use armed force. You're never going to convince me. Forget it. I'm not an advocate of violence. I'm not. But you're never going to convince me that anyone has an obligation to live in circumstances where you're poisoning your kids with water they drink every day because of this blockade. If they want to use rockets, they have the right to use rockets. If they had bombs, I'd say you can use your bombs. And I don't even care, and I'll even say, you kill Israeli civilians, that's just too bad. That's just too bad. Maybe those Israeli civilians should stop going on their vacations and stop having a good time, and also ending the blockade. So I have no problem saying it. I've said it 10,000 times. As I said, I paid a price for saying it, but you're not going to tell me I'm not going to say it. Kids aren't obliged to drink poisoned water. Period. Full stop. No argument, no debate. But it doesn't work. The armed resistance doesn't work. I'm not saying they don't have the right to do it. They have the right to do it. But it's not working. It's not a strategy that works. And I think that the strategy that we use in our civil rights movement, it could work there. It could work there. Because you can embarrass thugs like Obama and super thugs like even Trump. Well, Trump will be yes, it will be a very tough nut to crack. I recognize that. No, it is. It's going to be very tough. One of the scariest things about the era we're currently living in is that, Trump is just lining up with every murderous dictator on earth. whether it's Sisi in Egypt, Erdogan in Turkey, Duterte now in the Philippines. I mean, these people, I mean, literally, Duterte in the Philippines, he is the leader of a death squad. That's his job. He's the leader of a death squad. They just go out and they kill thousands of people. That's what they do. That's Duterte. Sisi, how did he come in office? He massacred 1,000 people in Egypt who were engaged in peaceful, nonviolent resistance. In August 2013, I guess it was a bloodbath. That's how he came into office. And that's the people Trump is now lining up with. It'll be tough. I recognize it's a tough nut to crack, but I think it has possibilities. I'm not going to say it's going to be easy, and I'm not going to say a lot of people who won't get killed. They'll get killed. But like you said, because you understood me clearly, and I'm glad you did, I said I never denied people would get killed in nonviolent resistance. I said, but at least they have a chance of succeeding.
Yeah, I think you said 5,000 would probably die.
Yes, I think that's probably true. I know I said 500. 5,000 would be a steep number, but I said that during Operation Protective Edge, 2,200 Palestinians were killed in Gaza. Gazans were killed, and I said probably a far fewer number would be killed before the international community would be forced to take action.
Norman, your light is very dim. It feels like we're talking to the Wizard of Oz.
Oh, excuse me. You should have told me. What day did God say, "Let there be light"? Wasn't that the first day?
Just push the lamp a little bit to your right so it's not shining in your light. A little bit more. That's good. Thanks.
That's one of my favorite African American spirituals. This little light of mine, let it shine, let it shine. You know that song?
Yes.
It's a very beautiful song.
Under a bushel. No. Anybody else know that?
Anybody else?
Who hasn't that?
You still have sunlight, and I wouldn't want to deprive you.
You have a question? First, we'll come to George.
Well, my name's Laura, by the way, and I just wanted to ask what your view is right now on there being 1 or 2 states in Palestine. I believe, what I understood is you did believe that there should be a 1 state for the Arab state in Palestine. I don't know if that view has changed, and you believe there should be a 2.
You know, I think first of all, let's start with the basics. United Nations, responsible agencies in the United Nations have published reports which say the title is, "Will Gaza Survive in the Year 2020?" They're facing real ecological catastrophes. There's a real question whether it will physically survive. There just may not be a Gaza 3 years from now. So I find these debates about 1 state, 2 state to be so completely irrelevant to what's happening now. The first job is to end the blockade. Secondly, even if we want to discuss 1 state, 2 states, politics is not about a personal choice. Like, you go into a Chinese restaurant, I'll take 1 from column A and 2 from column B. That's not politics. Politics is what's politically feasible, what's politically possible now in the foreseeable future based on the distribution of power. What's possible, what's feasible. There's no support in the world for 1 state. I mean, for Christ's sake, as we're sitting here right now, Hamas has just come out recognizing 2 states because they recognize it's the only historic possibility now. So when people ask me, what do you support? I always say, that's not the question. The question is, what's possible? What's a realistic possibility? If you ask me what I support, well, of course, I support no states. I don't believe in states. I think the idea of states in the modern world makes no sense. Every major problem facing humanity nowadays, whether it's climate change or whether it's a dysfunctional economy, at least in the Western world, or whether it's global inequality in the distribution of wealth, every major problem facing humanity now cannot be resolved within the framework of states. It has to be a global effort, or it just ain't going to happen. You can't solve the problem of climate change because 5 countries agree that they are going to stop producing fossil fuels. You can't do it. So rationally speaking, of course, I'm against all states. I'm not for 2 states. I'm not for 1 state. I want to abolish all states. But is that a historical possibility now? Is it? No. I mean, we're at the point where a president was elected. One of his main planks was not to abolish the states between the US and Mexico, but to build a bigger wall. So we're not at the point of abolishing states. I have to work within what's feasible, what's possible. It's not a question of what I want. I don't see any point in states, but I recognize that's the framework I have to operate in if I want to affect any kind of change in the world. So I find these sorts of debates, they're nice if you're sitting in a seminar in Prescott College, but in the real world, they have no bearing.
Monty, ask your question.
Yeah, my name is George Costler. I worked for CARE back in 52 to 54 in the Gaza Strip.
Well, good for you.
You're also from Brooklyn, George.
I really don't have, I have one comment. Thank you all for being here and for this presentation. It's long in coming, and I wish I had the power, the knowledge that you seem to exude about this situation. And I want to thank you so much. And I want to thank all these students. I don't know if it's a required course that you're over here, but if you came on your own, that doubles the gratitude. Thank you.
Well, you have a very impressive background. Gaza, the refugee question arose after the 48 war, and a large number of Palestinians who were kicked out of what became the state of Israel, they ended up going to Gaza. And so 80% of Gaza's population, at that time, 80% consisted of refugees. And international humanitarian organizations like CARE were supplying the refugees with the basic rudiments of life. So it's a rich history and it's an honorable one. So you should all be fortunate in talking to him and asking him what it was like. And whether those terrible people in Gaza he met, were they all terrorists? Mm-hmm.
Carly, why don't you ask the question? Stand up.
So, like, as an American citizen here, what could, like, I guess, what would you recommend us to be doing to, like, help this, like, crisis if we do, like, I guess, what would you say to that?
Look, it's a very tough time. I think that the best thing that anyone can do now is to join the various mass movements that are emerging in opposition to a pretty serious situation, and trying to give a shout out to the cause that's most important to you and make sure that the cause remains alive and has a voice in the emerging movement, which is, I have to say, guys, we're heading in a very difficult, we're heading in a difficult situation now with the current president. And we can't joke about it. And we can't laugh it off, because there are serious issues, I think, that are arising. The Vietnam War, for most of us, not all of us, because there were a lot of Americans, young men who went off and fought, but by and large, for most of us, it was a moral issue and not a practical one. But your generation, the challenges are very practical. Most of you are never going to, I'm sorry to have to be the one, the bearer of bad news. Most of you are probably going to end up never being able to move out of your parents' homes. It's very hard now to find work for people your age. You know, back in my day, a job meant 40 hours a week, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. You get a pension at the end, you get health coverage, you get vacation each year, 2 or 3 weeks vacation. There was a very clear idea of what it meant to have a job. Most of you in this room will never have a job like that. You will not. Most of you are going to be doing 2 or 3 crappy jobs with no pension, no future, no nothing. That's what the economy looks like now.
We hope not.
And there's no reason to be optimistic that there's going to be a way out. It's a very tough future. I have a lot of students who went 10 years without work. That's true. Who were never able to move out, never able to start up families. It's a very grim time. And unless you get your act together and turn things around, that's a very grim future. Then there's the second factor. The second factor is the climate issue is serious. I mean, the basic fact is Earth is a physical fact. It's a physical thing. And physical things can be destroyed. You know, if you can crush a rock, you can crush the Earth. It's a physical fact. There's no rational reason why the planet can't disintegrate the way a pebble is pulverized. And we're heading in a situation which many scientists are saying could become irreversible. And then the third fact is, I did not support Hillary Clinton. I worked very hard for Bernie Sanders, but it is true that, speaking calmly and rationally, that Trump is a madman. That's a real serious problem, because he's a madman and he's an egomaniac. If he turns the economy around, I very much doubt he will. If he turns the economy around, he's going to be reelected, which is a problem. And if it seems like his base is becoming disillusioned because he can't turn the economy around, he's going to do exactly what you expect. He's going to start up a war to distract people. It's very, some people, even Professor Chomsky, tends to be a pretty shrewd and dramatic political analyst. He says it's possible that Trump is going to create a fake terrorist attack in order to impose martial law here. But I don't think he will. I think there are ways in which you can stimulate a terrorist attack. Maybe you'll drop 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those mother of all bombs in Afghanistan or somewhere else. And then some Afghani living in the United States, or several of them, decide to blow something up because you keep dropping these mother of all bombs on their homeland. And then one more 9/11. I know, I'm not trying to be dramatic, and it's okay for me because I'm over 60. I'm going to jail. I'm going to jail. They're going to round up a lot of people. We're headed towards it's going to be a very touch and go time. So you folks have really got to climb out of your navels, climb out of your Facebook, and you have got to get your, and whatever else you do, you got to get your act together, because there's real problems on the horizon. And so when you ask what to do, I think the first thing you have to do is get involved and get your act together, because it's not theoretical for your generation. For my generation, a lot of it was theoretical. My generation, when we were in college, nobody ever thought about jobs. I don't remember ever having a conversation about what are you going to do when you get out. I'm serious. The assumption was when you were ready to work, whatever you want to do, there would be a job. That's how we lived. There was never any talk about it. Your generation, there are no jobs. Don't believe any of the baloney. There I agree with Trump. The media is just all nonsense. You know, they talk about how Obama turned around the economy. What are you talking about? Turned around the economy? 95% of the jobs that were created in our country since 2004, 95% were not regular jobs. They were just part-time jobs. 95% since 2004. They're not creating normal jobs anymore. You know, you got a real problem, and it's not a theoretical problem, it's a practical one. It's your lives. You want to have a family, you want to move out, you want to be on your own. It ain't on the drawing board unless you make it happen. And then there's the climate change, and then there is a certifiable nut who's the head of state, a dangerous nut, you know, somebody who could pick a war with China just because he's losing his base, because he can't do what he promised. He can't turn the economy around. No. So it's quite a, you know, but it's the Chinese expression, we live in, I think we're living in perilous times, you know. So your friends, I just hope you get moving before it's too late. And I'm very serious about this thing. I do think that Trump is hoping for a terrorist attack. I do. And that will clear the way to round up a lot of people. And I know I'll be among them. It's okay, I had my life. But it's not going to be okay for your generation. It's going to be a big problem. You cannot rule out that possibility. When you get home, just Google the name Duterte, D-U-T-E-R-T-E, the head of the Philippines. And this is the guy that Trump is now praising. It's very scary. Okay, one last question, and then we're going to move on. Young men?
Okay, then I'll follow up with you, Norman, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Norman, you don't have tenure. You were denied maybe more than once, right?
Wait, 1 second. I don't have a job. I've been unemployed for 10 years.
Okay, so you've published 10 books and you've published scholarly articles, but you've been denied tenure twice, right?
No, just once. I was an adjunct. You know what an adjunct is?
Okay, yeah, that's a hunter, right? Okay, so.
Hold on for 1/2 moment. Give me 1/2 moment. Hi, Marin. Yeah, I'm doing a Skype interview, so I'll talk to you in a few minutes. Sure, bye-bye. Go ahead.
So actually, Norman, Noam took maybe a different position than you took at the time. I don't know if you agree with him regarding the fact that you accused Alan Dershowitz of plagiarism. Do you still agree that Alan Dershowitz committed plagiarism?
Well, there was no disagreement between myself and Professor Chomsky over whether Alan Dershowitz committed plagiarism. That's actually not it's not a controversial question anymore.
My question is the strategy you used to the issue?
Professor Chomsky felt that the academia, by academia I mean college professors, it's a very weird place. In academia, you could do anything. You can lie, you can make up false numbers, you can make up fake facts, or as Trump likes to call them, alternative facts. There's only one thing you can't do in academia. You can't plagiarize. Plagiarism is like, it's a sin in academia. You can't copy somebody else's work because then you're taking another professor's work, and that's the supreme crime. And so Professor Chomsky's point of view was that Professor Dershowitz, Alan Dershowitz, then of Harvard Law School, he had falsified all sorts of facts about Israel's human rights record. And that was the big issue, that Dershowitz had falsified facts about human rights issues, and that plagiarism is a kind of silly little fetish obsession of academics, and I shouldn't have made a big deal about it. I should have focused just on Dershowitz's misrepresentation of Israel's human rights record. So that's where we differed.
Okay. Do you feel the dean of the Harvard Law School at the time, Elena Kagan, had a responsibility to intervene in Alan's behavior towards you and to do a review of the claims you made against Alan?
Look, I'm not trying to be facetious, and I'm not trying to be a rebel. I don't cast poses. I was a little bit of a poser when I was at your age, the people in the room, but I'm way past that. But still I say, look, the Harvard Law people, they're just a gang of thugs. You take the person who was the head of the Harvard Law School at the time. No, you'll hear me out, and you'll see whether you agree with me or not. Her name at the time, her name was Elena Kagan. Elena Kagan eventually was appointed to the Supreme Court. Obama appointed her to the Supreme Court. So she's one of now the three women on the court, Sonia Sotomayor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Elena Kagan. Before Elena Kagan was appointed, she was the dean of Harvard Law School. So listen what happens. My parents passed through the Nazi Holocaust. My father was in Auschwitz concentration camp. My mother was in Majdanek concentration camp. And every member of their family was exterminated during World War II. It means nothing to you because you've seen 1,000 articles, books, and movies about the Nazi Holocaust. But obviously it means a lot to me. My parents' suffering cannot be conveyed in words, what they endured. So as the professor pointed out, at some point I accused Professor Dershowitz on public television of plagiarizing in one of his books called The Case for Israel. And I made a lot of other accusations about his shoddy 10th rate scholarship that was beneath contempt even of a high school student. He got very angry. And I remember the show was called Democracy Now! And the anchor of the show, a woman named Amy Goodman, she warned me afterwards. She said, after he left the studio, she called me up and she said, Norman, watch out. He's looking for red meat. Watch out. And it was true. He went on what Professor Chomsky described. He went on a jihad to destroy me. And one of the things he started to say was that my late mother was a collaborator with the Nazis. She was what the expression during World War II for Jews who collaborated with the Nazis was a kapo, K-O-P-O, which meant a collaborator. He went around saying that my mother was a collaborator with the Nazis. You have to understand what that means. It means that my mother collaborated in the extermination of her family. That's a pretty serious thing to say. Now, he said it on the Harvard Law School website, not his personal website. the Harvard Law School website. And I contacted Elena Kagan, currently in the Supreme Court, that time Dean of Harvard Law School. And I asked her, do you have any limits on what's allowed to be said on a Harvard Law School website? And number two, I asked her, are you aware of any factual basis for that statement? So she said, I'm not going to answer the second question about the factual basis. But she said, on the first question, we have limits, but they are very broad limits. So I replied, oh, they're broad limits. I said, if somebody were to say on the Harvard Law School website that your mother was sleeping with the rabbi in the neighborhood, would that stay up on your website? That your mother's a whore? So she got very outraged. How dare you say that? I'm not going to talk anymore. Now, I ask you in the room, you use your own judgment. Which is the worst thing to say? That her mother slept with a rabbi, or my mother collaborated in the extermination of her family? So when I say they're thugs, they're thugs. They're thugs. You want me to defer to them? No, it ain't going to happen. When I went through my ordeal, and Professor Dershowitz was in the Wall Street Journal and everywhere trying to destroy me, did one professor at Harvard, one, say anything? Anything? A word? No, it's, oh, my friend Alan. You know, my friend Alan. You know, Alan Dershowitz, his entire adult life, how many of you know him? Because I don't want to talk about somebody who means nothing to you. Okay, most of you don't know him, so I'm not going to bother. Not worth it. But that's these people. And you know what? If I accomplished anything in my life, it's because I wasn't in academia. Because the limits that are put, the constraints that are placed, all of the ass kissing, all of the fake smiles, everyone calling each other colleague, even though they all hate each other's guts. You know, I could never survive there.
Norman, just quickly, I saw you speak last in Arizona in 2010. You spoke at the invitation of Students for Justice in Palestine at the Arizona State University. If I'm correct, I don't think you've come to Arizona in the last...
I'm not invited anymore. I haven't spoken anywhere.
Okay, but I want to say that since you've come to Arizona, and I actually told Noam about this in a personal meeting, Noam Chomsky's visited our state now 4 times out of the last 5 years.
Well, he's here now.
He stayed here for 6 weeks. So I want to ask you this. Would you be willing to come back to Arizona and do a presentation in person?
Sure, I'd be very happy to. I thought he told me he was there for a semester. It was
he was there for half a semester, like a 7-week intensive.
Yeah, I think his wife needed the
relaxation and the warmth.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Lucky you.
So we're gonna work on getting you to come back to Arizona, okay?
Yeah. Thank you so much. And
just one thing, Norman, there may be one more question. Anyone else have a follow-up question here? Okay, Cole, right there.
Okay, we're gonna make it last because I have 100 phone calls after returning.
Just quickly, Wilson. One more, Norman.
Yeah, really quick. I was wondering if Israel is profiting in any way from persecuting the Palestinians.
Is it profiting from?
Profiting from oppressing the Palestinians.
You know, it's a very good question. Why does Israel persist? What's the big gain from this? What's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? Their economy is thriving. Why do they insist on this? And most of it is, in my opinion, most of it is just because they think that you have to keep the Arabs in place. That if once they decide we're staying, you have to accept that we're staying. They have this idea that Arabs only understand the language of force. That's what they use, the expression. Arabs only understand the language of force. So they're afraid if they give in, the Arabs will take this as a victory, and the Arabs will then want more because Arabs only understand the language of force. Frankly, look, I've studied the thing for 30 years. I don't think they get any big benefits from the West Bank. No, I don't. If you do a cost-benefit analysis, it would probably have been better in the last 30 years if they just stayed within their border. So no. But a lot of human behavior is completely irrational, as I'm sure everybody in this room knows. There's a very nice little book, if you ever get to it, by Dostoevsky called Notes from Underground. And in the book, he just says, who we are as human beings, only 1/20th part of us is reason. And 19/20th part of us is just craziness, irrationality. So I don't think to try to tease out in every situation a rational motive, I think is pretty tough. A lot of times it's just pretty crazy. I don't think the Israelis gained much from their occupation. The only thing they gained was the whole world hates them, which is not much of a gain.
Cole has a comment.
Well, based on your answer for that, would you attribute more of the Israeli offensive to it being a race issue or money issue from, say, the arms trade?
I think, look, there are other elements, no question about it, but I don't think it's reducible to things like arms. A lot of it is this colonialist, racist, it's a lethal brew. It's this Jewish sense of superiority, in part, and we have to be honest about it. Jews have been quite significant in modern human history, certainly way overrepresented in terms of achievements like Nobel Prizes, percentage of college professors who are Jewish, all sorts of things. And that gives Jews this sense of we're better, this superiority complex. And we can't ignore that. And then there's the racism from being when you're a colonial power, you have to justify subordinating people. And so you have to get this kind of colonial mentality that we're superior to the natives. So there's this colonial superiority, there's this attitude of Jewish supremacy, and then there's all the Western racism and anti-Arab and anti-Muslim racism. And you put it all together, it's a pretty lethal brew. It's a lethal cocktail of nastiness. And then there's the fact that Israel's a small place. And when you have a small place, and they try to lord it over another population, it means everybody gets involved. I was talking about that with people today. If you look at surveys from around the world of who are the people you would last want to be tourists in your country, last one, everybody always says the Israelis. Why? It's perfectly obvious why. Because all the Israelis, they serve at some point in their lives in the army. So at some point, they're part of the occupation. And what does the occupation consist of? The occupation consists of you go into people's houses, you ransack the houses, you commandeer the houses. I'm not trying to use foul language, but you're defecating all over the house. You're pissing all over the house. That's what they do. They carry on like animals. And so are you really surprised that when they go on vacation and they go into somebody's hotel or somebody's motel or somebody's house, they carry on the same way? The whole place gets corrupted. You should just read the human rights reports, how these people carry on when they commandeer a house in Gaza. I'm telling you, an 800-pound gorilla shows more civility and humanity than these people. And so, of course, they carry on like that. And so the whole, it becomes a very, it's many levels of racism. The Jewish superiority, the white superiority, the colonial superiority, and you add it all up, it's a very unpretty picture. It's a very unpretty picture. Nasty people. Nasty. What do you want me to tell you? Is it inherent in their genes? Of course not. It's the situation. The situation created a real nastiness.
So, Norman, I want to, we have to finish now, but I want to, for us,
You're not quite in the picture. If you want to move over.
oh, okay. Can you see me now?
Yes, I do.
Well, I want to thank you, and we also want to give you a round of applause. And if students want to communicate with you, they can go to your website.
Just email me. It's fine. I spend about 5 hours each morning answering email. So 5 more emails won't kill me.
Well, you've got a lot of friends in Prescott, Arizona. So
Yeah, I hope you don't get arrested.
I hope all of us don't get arrested. And it's not really even a joke.
District going to Prescott College.
I'm serious. It's not a joke. If another 9/11 happens, we're in very serious trouble. We're in very serious trouble. And I think he's purposely trying to provoke it now.
Well, that's something to think about, for sure.
Yeah, it's something very unhappy to think about. So guys, get your act together, because it's always young people that save the world.
That's right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, George. Yeah. Oh, wow, look. You can see us the full screen. Don't we look good on